What if I told you that Star Wars: A New Hope wasn't just a space opera, but a filmmaking rebellion that nearly collapsed before it even reached theaters? The movie that redefined cinema was built on chaos, lies, and secrets that would shock even the most dedicated fans. Behind every iconic moment lies a trail of disasters, betrayals, and decisions so controversial they almost killed the entire franchise before it began. If you're ready to discover the dark truth behind the Death Star, hit that subscribe button because what you're about to learn will change how you see this beloved galaxy forever. Number 20. The movie had a completely different title and story. Before Star Wars became the cultural phenomenon we know today, it was called The Adventures of Luke Starkiller, as taken from the Journal of the Whills, Saga 1, The Star Wars. Luke wasn't a Skywalker, the Force wasn't fully developed, and Han Solo was originally written as a green alien creature rather than the charming smuggler we love. The entire concept was more fantasy than science fiction, resembling something closer to Tolkien's Middle-earth than the space opera that conquered the world. George Lucas spent months crafting this bizarre alternate universe before realizing it was too complex and strange for audiences to follow. He stripped away layers of mythology, simplified character names, and restructured the entire narrative just weeks before filming began. The galaxy far, far away we know today was born from the ashes of this discarded fever dream, proving that sometimes the best ideas come from knowing what to throw away. But that wasn't the only title change that almost happened. Number 19. George Lucas was literally hospitalized from the stress. The pressure of creating Star Wars didn't just exhaust George Lucas, it nearly ended him. After wrapping production, Lucas began the nightmare of editing, overseeing visual effects, collaborating with John Williams on the score, and fighting daily battles with Fox executives over impossible deadlines. The stress manifested as severe chest pains, crippling anxiety attacks, and chronic insomnia that left him unable to function. Doctors rushed him to the hospital and warned that if he didn't slow down immediately, he risked permanent heart damage or worse. The man who was creating a galaxy was being destroyed by it, and medical professionals feared he might not survive to see his vision reach theaters. Lucas later admitted that Star Wars wasn't just a movie for him, it was literally a war against his own body and mind. The irony wasn't lost on anyone close to the production. Number 18. Harrison Ford wasn't even supposed to be an actor. Harrison Ford never auditioned for Han Solo because he wasn't an actor on the film, he was a carpenter. Ford had been hired to build office furniture and shelving for the casting director's office, hammering and sawing while real actors auditioned for the coveted roles. When other performers struggled with Lucas's unusual dialogue, desperate casting directors asked Ford to read lines opposite them just to help with the process. His natural, grounded delivery was so refreshing compared to the theatrical performances they'd been hearing that everyone in the room stopped what they were doing. Ford's casual approach to the material made the dialogue feel real instead of stilted, and suddenly the role that had been considered for Burt Reynolds, Al Pacino, and Kurt Russell had found its perfect match. It wasn't destiny that made Han Solo iconic, it was construction work. Yet Ford's casting created another unexpected problem. Number 17. Chewbacca's actor nearly got shot by real hunters. Peter Mayhew's towering 7'3" frame made him perfect for Chewbacca, but his realistic costume nearly got him eliminated in the worst possible way. While filming scenes in California's Redwood National Forest, local hunters spotted what they believed was an actual Bigfoot wandering through the trees. Armed and convinced they'd found the legendary creature, several hunters began tracking Mayhew through the forest. The production team had to assign armed security guards to escort Mayhew whenever he left the immediate filming area, and crew members joked nervously that they needed forest rangers more than stormtroopers. One hunter actually raised his rifle before a crew member screamed and waved him off, coming within seconds of turning the beloved Wookiee into a cryptid casualty. The incident was so serious that production nearly moved to studio sets to avoid future encounters. This wasn't the only technical disaster plaguing the shoot. Number 16. The iconic opening crawl was a physical nightmare. That legendary yellow text crawling up the screen wasn't created with computers, it was filmed using a massive physical model that nearly broke the production. The entire crawl was printed on a 6-foot-long black surface, and a camera rig had to move slowly across it at the perfect angle to create the illusion. Any slight vibration, lighting error, or movement mistake meant starting the entire process over from scratch. It took the crew hours to capture a single usable take, and Lucas was so obsessed with getting it perfect that they burned through days of precious shooting time. The opening crawl was Lucas's tribute to old Flash Gordon serials, but the technical challenge was so intense that several crew members suggested scrapping it entirely. They had no idea they were creating one of the most recognizable openings in cinema history using nothing more than cardboard, lights, and pure determination. Meanwhile, the location shooting was turning into a disaster. Number 15. A freak rainstorm nearly destroyed everything. The desert planet Tatooine was supposed to showcase relentless heat and endless sand, but Mother Nature had other plans for the Tunisia shoot. On the very first day of filming, something virtually impossible happened in the Sahara Desert. It rained. Not just a light drizzle, but a torrential downpour that destroyed carefully constructed sets, ruined expensive equipment, and turned the sandy landscape into a muddy swamp. The crew watched in horror as months of preparation dissolved before their eyes, and some whispered that it felt like the universe was trying to stop the movie from being made. The storm delayed production for days, forced expensive set reconstructions, and created a logistical nightmare that nearly pushed the already tight budget past its breaking point. Lucas later said it felt like the Force itself was working against them from day one, but the weather wasn't their only enemy in Tunisia. Number 14. The lightsaber sound came from accidental TV interference. The iconic hum of a lightsaber, one of the most recognizable sounds in film history, was born from pure accident and electronic interference. Sound designer Ben Burtt was experimenting with different audio sources when he combined the steady hum of an old film projector motor with bizarre interference he picked up by holding a microphone near an old CRT television. When he accidentally moved the mic while recording, it created that distinctive swooshing sound of a saber cutting through air. What seemed like a technical mistake became the sonic signature of the Jedi, and Burtt realized he'd stumbled upon something magical. The sound wasn't created by expensive equipment or sophisticated technology. It was born from static serendipity and the kind of happy accident that defines legendary filmmaking. The weapon of choice for galactic peacekeepers was powered by television interference and projector noise. Unfortunately, the finished film initially sounded terrible. Number 13. The original cut was completely unwatchable. Before John Williams added his legendary score, before the final visual effects were completed, and before proper editing saved the day, Star Wars was a disaster. The original rough cut was so poorly paced, confusing, and flat that friends of George Lucas told him to either scrap the project entirely or start over from scratch. The dialogue fell completely flat, the effects looked cheap and unfinished, and the entire movie felt like a student film rather than a major studio production. Enter Marcia Lucas, George's wife, and a brilliant editor who essentially rebuilt the entire movie from the ground up. She restructured scenes for emotional impact, created rhythm where none existed, and gave the film the pulse it desperately needed. Without her surgical precision and instinctive understanding of storytelling, the Force might never have found its rhythm, and the galaxy far, far away could have died in the editing room. Yet even after saving the film, the studio wanted to bury it. Number 12. Fox executives tried to hide the movie from audiences. When Star Wars was finally completed, 20th Century Fox executives had absolutely no idea what they had created. They planned a tiny release in just 32 theaters nationwide, treating it like a B-movie destined for quick failure. To force theater owners to accept this strange space movie they didn't believe in, Fox made them a ruthless deal. Play Star Wars or you don't get The Other Side of Midnight, the high-profile drama they were convinced would be the year's biggest hit. The irony was devastating when Star Wars absolutely destroyed The Other Side of Midnight at the box office, becoming the blockbuster phenomenon of the decade. Theaters that had reluctantly agreed to show the space opera were suddenly begging Fox for more prints as lines wrapped around city blocks. The studio had tried to contain what they saw as a weird experiment, but instead they'd unleashed a cultural earthquake. This wasn't the only element that started as something completely different. Number 11. The Force was just placeholder dialogue. The mystical energy field that became the spiritual heart of Star Wars originally existed as nothing more than placeholder text in Lucas's script. The Force wasn't a mystical power connecting all living things, it was just vague dialogue used to describe an undefined spiritual element that Lucas hadn't fully developed. He seriously considered removing all references to it entirely, thinking audiences would find it too confusing or silly. What saved the concept was Alec Guinness, who despite hating the script infused the Force with gravitas and dignity through his performance. John Williams then created that haunting, whispery theme that plays during Obi-Wan's teachings, giving the concept sonic weight and emotional resonance. What began as Lucas's throwaway placeholder became the philosophical foundation of the entire saga, proving that sometimes the most important elements emerge from uncertainty. The financial constraints were equally accidental. Number 10. The studio gave the film a death sentence budget. Fox executives looked at Star Wars and saw a B-movie with delusions of grandeur, so they slashed the budget down to just $11 million for a film that demanded unprecedented effects, elaborate sets, and intricate costumes. Lucas begged for more money, but studio heads literally laughed at his requests, convinced they were already throwing good money after bad on a project destined to fail miserably. In desperation, Lucas made a decision that would change his life forever. He forfeited a larger director's fee in exchange for full merchandising rights, a deal the executives found so ridiculous they nearly choked on their laughter. They saw toys and lunchboxes as worthless trinkets, but that skeleton key budget forced Lucas to innovate using miniatures, matte paintings, and old-school camera tricks that became legendary techniques, while the merchandising rights eventually made him a billionaire. Even Lucas himself had no faith in what he was creating. Number 9. George Lucas was convinced the movie would completely flop. George Lucas wasn't just nervous about Star Wars, he was absolutely convinced it would be a catastrophic failure that would end his directing career. His previous film, THX-138, had been butchered by the studio, and the chaotic, problem-plagued shoot for A New Hope left him emotionally and physically drained. Lucas told friends that the movie had gotten away from him and that audiences would reject it as silly nonsense. On the film's premiere night, Lucas was so certain of disaster that he fled to Hawaii with Steven Spielberg rather than face the inevitable humiliation. Cast members thought the dialogue was terrible, crew members mocked the concept, and even Harrison Ford called the script clunky and unworkable. But when Lucas returned from his self-imposed exile, he discovered that Star Wars had already exploded into a cultural phenomenon, with lines around the block and theaters adding showtimes every hour. The production problems had been even worse than Lucas imagined. Number 8. Crew members actually quit mid-production. The chaotic Star Wars shoot was so miserable and seemingly hopeless that experienced crew members literally walked off the set and never returned. Between the equipment failures in Tunisia, the incomprehensible dialogue, and Lucas's inexperience with large-scale productions, veteran film workers decided the project was career suicide and abandoned ship before it sank completely. Those who stayed often mocked the material openly, making jokes about the ridiculous names, silly costumes, and what they saw as childish storytelling. The British crew in particular treated the production like an expensive joke, showing up late and putting minimal effort into their work because they assumed no one would ever see the finished film. The movie that would revolutionize cinema was being made by people who thought it was embarrassing garbage. Ironically, that embarrassing garbage would save an entire studio. Number 7. The movie single-handedly saved Fox from bankruptcy. 20th Century Fox wasn't just struggling in 1977, they were teetering on the edge of complete financial collapse. A series of expensive flops had drained their resources, executive shakeups had created chaos in the boardrooms, and they were preparing for massive layoffs when Star Wars hit theaters like a financial meteor. The studio's stock price soared overnight as the film generated over $100 million in its first year. Executives who had mocked Lucas and tried to bury his space opera suddenly rewrote history, claiming they'd believed in the project all along. The success of Star Wars didn't just finance a generation of future films, it literally saved jobs, prevented bankruptcy, and redefined what a summer blockbuster could achieve. The movie they'd treated as a throwaway experiment became their corporate resurrection. But Lucas missed the moment everything changed. Number 6. Lucas missed his own movie's historic opening. While Star Wars was making history in theaters across America, creating the modern blockbuster and changing cinema forever, George Lucas was sitting in a Hawaiian restaurant, convinced his career was over. He'd fled to Maui with Steven Spielberg, too terrified of failure to face the premiere or early audience reactions. Lucas genuinely believed the film would be laughed out of theaters and that he'd never direct another major movie. Meanwhile, unprecedented crowds were lining up around city blocks, theater owners were frantically calling Fox for more prints, and entertainment reporters were declaring the birth of a new cinematic era. Lucas spent the most important night of his professional life eating dinner and avoiding phone calls, completely unaware that he'd just become the most powerful filmmaker in Hollywood. The man who created the galaxy missed the moment his universe conquered Earth. That missed opportunity paled next to the financial decision that changed everything. Number 5. The merchandising deal that created a billionaire. When George Lucas traded his director's fee for merchandising rights, Fox executives thought they'd just watched a desperate filmmaker make the worst business decision in Hollywood history. They literally laughed at the idea that anyone would want to buy toys, clothing, or products based on their weird space movie. The concept of film merchandising barely existed, and they saw Lucas's request as the pathetic grab of a director who knew his movie would fail. That single decision transformed Lucas from a struggling filmmaker into one of the wealthiest people in entertainment history. The merchandising empire generated billions in revenue, funded his future projects, and gave him complete creative independence for decades. While Fox made money from the film itself, Lucas built an empire from action figures, lunchboxes, and products the studio had dismissed as worthless. Their laughter cost them a fortune that could have funded hundreds of movies, but the real secrets were hiding in the smaller details. Number 4. Alec Guinness actively tried to turn fans away. The respected actor who brought dignity to Obi-Wan Kenobi despised Star Wars so intensely that he tried to convince fans to stop watching it. Guinness called the script fairy tale rubbish and referred to the dialogue as mumbo-jumbo, taking the role purely for financial reasons rather than any belief in the material. He was embarrassed that this silly space opera would overshadow his distinguished theatrical career and prestigious film work. In one particularly harsh encounter, Guinness told a young fan he'd only sign an autograph if the child promised never to watch Star Wars again. The irony was brutal. He made more money from this rubbish than from any other project in his entire career, but he resented every dollar because it came attached to lightsabers instead of legitimate drama. Yet his disdain was nothing compared to physical suffering on set. Number 3. The R2-D2 actor was repeatedly trapped and forgotten. Kenny Baker, the performer inside R2-D2, endured what he later called the loneliest role in cinema history. The tiny droid costume was barely ventilated, had no internal communication system, and left Baker completely cut off from the outside world. On multiple occasions, crew members simply forgot he was inside the costume and left him trapped during lunch breaks while they went to eat. In the scorching Tunisian heat, the metal costume became a literal oven, and Baker would scream for help, but no one could hear him over generators and desert wind. He spent hours sweating and panicking inside what he called a dust bin, wondering if anyone remembered he existed. The beloved droid that became a symbol of loyalty and friendship was operated by a man experiencing claustrophobia and abandonment. But even that wasn't the most disgusting aspect of the production. Number 2. The trash compactor scene caused real infections. George Lucas's obsession with authenticity turned the trash compactor sequence into a legitimate health hazard that made the cast genuinely ill. Instead of using clean props, Lucas insisted on filling the set with actual garbage mixed with stagnant water, chemical foam, and unidentified sludge that hadn't been changed for several days. The smell was so overwhelming that Carrie Fisher admitted she gagged between takes. Mark Hamill accidentally inhaled the contaminated water and developed a serious respiratory infection that required medical treatment. The toxic mixture of rotting food, wet costume fabric, and chemical additives created a bacterial nightmare that put the actor's health at genuine risk. Harrison Ford later joked that it smelled worse than Jabba the Hutt looked, but for the other cast members, it was no laughing matter. Which brings us to the most controversial decision of all. Number 1. Carrie Fisher was forced to tape down her breasts. George Lucas made one of the most bizarre and uncomfortable wardrobe decisions in film history when he declared that Princess Leia couldn't wear a bra because there's no underwear in space. His reasoning was that in zero gravity, bras would float and potentially strangle the wearer, so Carrie Fisher was forced to tape her chest down painfully under her white gown for the entire shoot. Fisher later called it one of the dumbest things I ever heard, but also the most Lucas thing ever. The uncomfortable and degrading process had to be repeated daily throughout filming, causing Fisher physical pain and humiliation that she endured for the sake of Lucas's bizarre vision of space authenticity. What Lucas called science fiction was really just an excuse for a decision that prioritized his weird theories over his actress's comfort and dignity. Star Wars: A New Hope wasn't built on certainty or studio confidence. It was forged in chaos, doubt, and the kind of desperate creativity that comes from having no other choice. Every iconic moment we love emerged from disasters, accidents, and decisions that seemed insane at the time. The movie that redefined cinema almost never made it to theaters, and the galaxy we worship was born from the ashes of failure, fear, and sand in all the wrong places. If this changed how you see the most famous space opera ever made, show some love with a like, drop a comment about which fact shocked you most, and subscribe for more hidden truths behind your favorite films. The Force may be with you, but the real power was always in the stories behind the story.